Mark, I wanted to say firstly, thank you so much for agreeing to be a guest on Gene East's A Grade podcast. I massively appreciate your time. When I first started the series, you were a guest that I wanted to get on. And just really appreciate you taking the time out of your day. I know you've been flying around Europe with customers, so it's an opportune moment to get you at home and, in a position to be able to do this. But yeah, just really appreciate your time.
No, it's great to be here. Always enjoy our conversations, James. And very, very happy to be here. And especially sat at home for once rather than in an airport or in a hotel moving around. So great to see you.
The audio is definitely better when you're at home rather than we've spoken many times when you're in transit, bud. So for sure. It's good to get this time. And I started this podcast series, Mark, because I wanted to talk to sales leaders, top performing sales professionals in our market about their career. And I felt that you'd be an ideal guest for a load of different reasons, right? One, your track record of success, but also the different types of businesses that you've worked in, both in terms of size, but also the products and now more services. So just your breadth of experience across the markets, I felt was, it's certainly interesting to me, and I know will be interesting to our guests. So that's one of the reasons why I've been looking forward to this conversation.
No, looking forward to it. And when you mentioned it, I thought, and I've seen a couple of the podcasts, and it's a good way to be able to give something back, and at least give some thoughts and interests. And I've seen some of the questions and what we're going to cover, and it's definitely been an interesting career from where I started to where I am now. That's for sure. But a very enjoyable one along the way too.
Yeah, that's it. I think time goes so quickly that you look back and you're like, wow, that was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and it's kind of sometimes, especially I think since COVID as well, it's been like a time warp, right? And so sometimes it's difficult, there isn't always signposts in terms of how quick it's going. So when you look back on your career, I think it's interesting. And that's a good place to start, right? So doing the research, I know you started out with OneSource back in 2000. Was that how did you get into sales? Did you fall into sales? How did it come about?
So my degree's in chartered surveying, right? And I played a lot of sport. So I was a big hockey player. During the time when I finished my degree, I wasn't quite sure I wanted to go down the route of that. So I just started doing some work, and I started doing a telesales job. It's almost like the David Brent in Slough in a telesales call center, doing sales, selling Cisco and other sort of software pieces, setting up appointments for people, and saw that I was quite decent at it. But I always knew I was going to go traveling and play abroad in South Africa. So I was working on that, but I had a good team manager. I performed very well, and then went abroad and played hockey. I was wondering what to do when I came back, and the person that I'd worked with as a team manager had gone to OneSource to set up the internal sales team.
Nice.
So I came back in November, which was a terrible idea, having left Durban in the sun, to come back into winter thinking, what have I done? Why am I here? But ended up starting out as a telesales person, setting appointments for OneSource. And OneSource was an interesting one at that time, but I'll come on to that in a minute. But starting out on that front, on the phone, setting up appointments, cold calling. And it's almost been taken away a little bit these days, because that was a very good grounding, from the hard beat of setting up appointments for someone that you'd never met. Could you open a call? Could you set something up? Could you get their interest and then get a meeting in the diary for someone else to go and then meet them out on the road? And that's how I started.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting you say that. I think, the cold calling and being on the phone is such a hot topic, for my business and certainly our customers. And I think you're absolutely right to say that it's almost like a lost art. The thing is, I think for younger salespeople entering the sales ranks, right, if they can get on top of that, it really gives them an advantage. If they'll pick up the phone, it gives them a massive advantage. There's nothing better, straight to source,
It was something that when you started, you didn't want, you were nervous. You didn't want to do it. I mean, I've been told no. I've been told in other more aggressive ways, why are you calling me? I do remember one where I got told to F oh, why are you calling me? I left it 5 minutes and rang him back and asked, was he having a bad day? I'm sorry, why did he call me that? And still got the appointment. So I was quite happy about that. But, it was one of those where it was a really good grounding. GDPR has become a bit of a challenge now, and access to data and the right data. So I think there's different ways these days that people have to work, and it must be harder in certain ways to get up the scale and learn, because I think it was a great learning as to how to open and how to get yourself moving forward.
For sure, yeah, I think absolutely right. Those nerves, getting on top of those nerves and able to use those nerves to your advantage is something that you've got to learn as well. And having that grit and resilience, to get through the hump of those early stages as a seller, you have to have that. It's interesting as well about going to play hockey in South Africa. I didn't know that, I didn't realize that. And it doesn't surprise me. I think when I look at top sales professionals, there's a competitive edge in them that often is a strong indication of success in sales. Because I'm sure, like professional sport, any sort of sport, really, amateur or professional level, is unforgiving, right? You're going to get your answer as to how good you are. There's going to be no one's going to give you anything. And sales is the same. The market's going to tell you how good you are. You're going to get your results based on your skill set and your application.
Yeah, it's something that I often look for in a person is to what's their outside activities, what are their interests, and sport definitely has a similarity to that, especially from a hunter point of view. In terms of going a new business, that the tenacity, the willingness to keep going, the knockdowns that you get, you get injured, how quickly can you get back? I remember getting injured playing and then not getting selected even though I had a great sports camp. Didn't get selected for the European Championships, under 21. I was absolutely gutted. But you've got to keep, realise that you've got to keep on going. It's easy to give up, and I think so. A lot of similarities you see within sport, within competitiveness, the teamwork, the ethics of how do you work together, how do you then, but also the discipline you've got in yourself to be able to go in and keep yourself at the top level, and then being able to take the hits is something that I think fits very well into the sales profession.
I couldn't agree with you more. And when you see, as you mentioned, when someone has that background, they do have that resilience because they have been in a real life example where, and maybe regularly, where they haven't got the result they wanted, but their response to that is to work harder, is to basically be better, analyze, look at it. How can you improve? How can you get better? As opposed to, candidly, a more flimsy approach to rejection. You gotta get on with it. So that's super interesting. I was looking as well, thinking about the time, like early 2000s, obviously the .com, bubble and everything that flowed from that. Like, did that impact? Like, did you feel that then, or was it not really?
To be honest, my easiest ever job was probably the first job with OneSource, and I'll give you a reason why. OneSource was the first internet product for business information, right?
Nice.
So at the time, BVD, Bureau van Dijk, was CD-ROM. Yeah. I mean, that shows my age, right, as well, So, this internet thing that everyone today, people just take for granted. OneSource was the first business information system, and online selling for analysts to do, or for analysts or for salespeople to use it as an information tool that could help them be better prepared, do due diligence, try and get insights as to whether it was for supply chain, whether it was for marketing, whether it was for sales, was a very, very good tool that ultimately ended up, I think, being sold to Dun & Bradstreet further down the line. But back in those days, it was a tool where I joined the team as a telesales person, and the sales team was a very, very competitive, very well-rounded sales team. It was one of those where when you walk in and everyone gets on well, but there's a very healthy competition, two different sites almost with each other. Everyone was hitting target. It was a great time, and it almost helped me really want to get into sales, and I want some of this because people were going off on winners clubs off to Florida, and the team went and had their offsites over in the US as well. It was really exciting time to be involved in that, and that helped drive me on as well to see people doing well, earning good money, and the good competitive nature of what they were doing.
It's so important. I find I wanted to ask you about that, but you've answered that. In terms of how important it is to get off to a good start and to actually be in an environment where you're seeing what good looks like, and that competitive edge. That's the dream, isn't it? Having a sales force where there's no lone wolves. Like everyone's working together, but you want to be top of the leaderboard. You want to, you want to do that. It's having that initial experience is almost, it's so important. It gets you off to such a good start.
It really does. And I think it is important to try and get off to a good start. I have done, and I haven't also done. I was virtually when I'll talk a bit later, but with Dun & Bradstreet, I was virtually on a pip and on the edge of close because I went big and tried to land some big deals. And just before I was about to get myself into trouble, I landed a massive deal, and that got me out of trouble. And then I was one of the top sales performers the following year. So I think sometimes, yes, you will want it and you want to do it as much as you can, but if you do the right things, it will come. And sometimes if it doesn't, then it wasn't the right environment, the right time for you. You've got to just be, have the willingness to believe in yourself that you're doing the right things, and we'll get there. But ideally, getting off to a good start really, really helps, because it just takes the pressure immediately off. In sales, we're always in pressure. You're only as good as your last deal, right?
100%. And the thing is, right, I think I completely agree with all of that. And I think since COVID, we've had a really strange market, right? dot-com bubble, 2008, great financial crisis, now COVID. It's been these are big seismic events, right, that have had a massive impact. I think for the individual joining the sales ranks in those years, it's been challenging for sure. And we'll come on to this in a minute, but it's also really difficult for sales leaders when you've got good quality salespeople that are new to the business or new to selling, but they're in an environment that's really challenging. We don't blame the markets for salespeople. We take responsibility, but unfortunately, there are times where the markets they're just down. It's actually really difficult from a sales leader perspective in those times as well, to be saying to people, keep going. You are doing the right things. There are some headwinds at the minute. That means it's not straightforward. So those years are like, we often focus on the kind of the people, like the people that haven't worked through those times before. But I think for the sales leaders, it's difficult as well.
Yeah, especially when you've got COOs and you've got your CEO saying, well, "Where's the money? I need the revenue. We've got to drive this, right?" And you've got a boss. I've had bosses where there's no for an answer. It's you will find it. Go and find it. And that's hard to then pass down to your own teams to ensure that. Yeah, you've got to work it as hard as you can. Are you doing everything that you possibly can? And I think, and that's the ultimate thing. Are you doing, and intrinsically as yourself, yes, and you also know as your team, are they doing as much as they possibly can? And if they're doing as much as they can, then you can't ask for any more, right? Yeah. And it's a tough thing as a sales leader. I mean, I much prefer being a salesperson half the time than being a sales leader, because I'm in control of myself when I'm on my own and I'm working through it, and I know what I can do and where I'm at. Then trying to work out the personality of the team that you've got, who responds well to what, how are they getting the most out of them, and having time to spend with them is another thing that makes it harder as a sales leader.
100%. Yeah, absolutely right. I think there's so many factors in play for sure. We'll come on to them in a second as well, but I couldn't agree with everything you said. There's absolutely nailed on. You then obviously had successful years there, and then went to Dun & Bradstreet in 2006. You moved, I think, to D&B from maybe an earlier stage business that you were working in. Like that trajectory, like did you want to go and join Dun & Bradstreet as a bigger business, having had worked in this? Like, how did that come about?
No, so I'd moved from OneSource from telesales into sales. It was then one of the top performers there, done really, really well. Honestly, I asked for a pay rise and it wasn't given, And ultimately, then it was like, okay, so where do you value me? And I decided to then move. And I'd been approached by someone that had previously worked for OneSource. Nice. He'd gone to this startup, which was out of the HP Compaq merger, created a CRM solution. Me and CRM is always entertaining, But I went to work for a CRM provider that was created out of that platform. They were early stage with some really clever technology, especially looking around stakeholder management in visualization within CRM back in, this was 2004, and I got a long way down the line. It was a good learning for me, and I think it's a great learning for any FinTech tech startup, right? I got down to the last two with O2, for CRM.
Nice.
And I had the best product. What I didn't have was a P&L on a system that could get me through the procurement and the relevant process. So I had a sponsor, I had the right people, but in terms of budget, balance sheet, likelihood of me being around within the next few years, someone of a PLC nature like them at the time, why would they going to choose me? And they went with Salesforce.com, which was still in its early days, but the number one sort of market leader after the other sort of ERP type systems that we're trying to do, the likes of Siebel that we're trying to do CRM. So it was really good learning, but also at the time, my wife was pregnant, about to have our first child, and it was, can I stick with something that's a startup going, and I'm not sure how long it will last. And then I got approached by someone from Dun & Bradstreet that I'd worked with previously that said, would you like to come and join me there? And I decided that was a better option to go to a larger corporate and actually jump into something that I knew very, very well and wasn't as risky, is the honest answer.
Makes absolute sense. And, having gone through that journey where you've got young children, I've still got, my youngest is still pretty young, but especially for the first one, right? You're about to have someone on the payroll for at least 25 years, being able to close the deals. And it's funny, Mark, you're talking about, people never get sacked for buying IBM. It's a similar type of thing with a Salesforce, and you can understand it. But of course, for the seller, as you said, it's a great learning curve. There are other factors at play, not just how good is the product and how good you presented it, right? There's other stuff as well that's going to affect the ability to do the deals. Yeah.
And I've seen that, I think, over the years, especially a lot of startups, you get someone who's very clever, goes and builds a great product, but hasn't really thought about, especially for the banking sector, how am I going to get that into the bank? How am I going to get that through PII? How am I going to get through, whether it's an on-prem or off-prem, or a hosted type solution? What's my security, my governance, all those protocols? Have I got single sign-on? That type of this hasn't often factored a lot of the time to, I've got a great product, but they haven't really worked out how to get it on board. And that was a great learning for me. So although it was a gutting after spending a long sales cycle getting all the way through, I should have known, and hindsight, I'd have probably given the product away for free, or given them the ability to, that if anything happened, they owned the code, and that's how I would have probably approached it today, compared to asking for a big sum of money for something that was relatively new in the market.
It's interesting. It won't surprise you when I say that at the moment, the amount of money going into AI, these AI startups are just left, right, and center, right? Money pouring in from all parts of, all over the world. And when you speak to the people there, it's kind of like they're not able to really describe what they do, but the bits and pieces around it that make it sellable to banks or regulated customers, like your governance, like your security, and all the other fun and games that go around it. Like there's big gaping holes in there, in end to end. And, so I know exactly what you mean, and these are really important points for anyone thinking about going into that journey. It's not just a case of does it have product market fit for whatever it's trying to answer. It's all the rest of it that that gives it the chance of being successful in the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. I think sometimes the mundane, boring stuff. We all want to design the product and create the next great thing. That in my sector, within financial crime is, how can I automate investigations and transaction monitoring? How can I make KYC simple? Because it certainly should be, but it isn't. So all these things, and how do you bring that AI in? But there's a lot of the boring stuff behind it that is, how do I maintain it? How do I manage model drift? How do I get through model governance, which is not a simple thing within a big tier one bank, especially. All these things need to be thought about when you're building the product and the back end of it, and the support solutions.
For sure. So then into D&B, fabulous business. Dun & Bradstreet, what a customer. They're the market. One of the market leaders and a great firm. Was that your first real experience of like digital risk? I know they use the data for different points, but was that part of it? Was that your first step into that type of side of the market?
Yeah, so I started predominantly more on the credit risk and the supply chain risk sort of side, rather than the banking especially. I was more within the sort of the services areas of the UK with my territory and what I was looking at. But the use of the Duns number or unique reference identifier was so powerful at the time.
Yes.
And no one else was really, they were the market leader in that front. But then understanding how it could be utilized. And I think that's one thing I've really enjoyed in my career, is having jumped across different areas, understanding that data is the fundamental of everything. Good
Absolutely.
quality data is critical. And even today, AI is only as good as the data that it feeds
Absolutely.
off. And the outcome is a challenge. And that's why people are doing a lot of AI, but still struggling, because ultimately maintaining and keeping your data quality is a real challenge. And that's why Dun & Bradstreet was a great place, in terms of the size of who it was. It was a name from, having come from, and this is going from a big company to a small company. Who are you? Versus you're a known. So I'm not having to spend half my time trying to convince someone that you're worth talking to. I could
100%.
ring in and go, Dun & Bradstreet. Later in my career, NASDAQ. I could go in and go, I'm NASDAQ. And then they go, hang on, what's your security and what's your challenges? We're NASDAQ. And everyone would go, yeah, sure. So having that big company mentality, it's nice that you're not having to prove who you are and that you're worthwhile talking to. And that opened a lot of doors. And then you can cross-sell, upsell, and work through it because of who you are. You deliver a product, and then you get asked for more.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. That first part of the, getting the first part of the sales process, actually just explaining who you are. When you work in a bigger business, that's all been taken care of, right? You don't have to worry too much about that. But then thinking about it as well. So 2006. Just prior to the great financial crash of 2008, did you feel that again? Was that another, or was it, or given D&B's position at that time, was it relatively straightforward to navigate that, that financial crisis?
Yeah, I think many other institutions struggled, and obviously I wasn't working necessarily directly in the banking sector at the time, but even for Dun & Bradstreet, it still was a time of growth and expansion and people needing that data. Because if you think of when they were looking at credit risk and the likelihood of people defaulting and going out of business, that was an area that people were utilizing the data and trying to make sure that, who am I doing business with? Are they going to be here? Are they likely to get into trouble? Can I get any foresight or insight into what might happen to them from a risk perspective? And are they likely to be able to pay? So for D&B, it was quite a good time and quite a growth time across the whole of the globe.
When you think about starting in 2000, the first 10 years and all the different types of businesses and sizes of business that you worked in, you covered a lot of ground in that first 10 years, right? You sort of worked with, market leaders and startups competing with the likes of Salesforce. How much of that, when I speak to people who are in bigger businesses and who are thinking about joining earlier stage businesses, I say to them that overwhelmingly it's a mindset thing. There's problems in both. The problems manifest themselves in different ways. They obviously feel very different working in a market leader to a startup for some of the reasons we've already mentioned and many others. Mm-hmm. How much of it do you think it is a mindset thing as to people just deciding to get on board with it? Or do you think that there are some people where bigger businesses just definitely better align with them? Or, do you think it is more of a personality trait thing? How do you think about that?
I think it's a bit of both. I think there is a mindset, but you've got different problems. With a big business, it's established, it's well known, it's got multiple procedures. One of the things I got frustrated with big business was trying to get something moving quickly to try and get through. You've got to go to multiple departments. You've got to follow the governance of every different step and process. You've got to wait sometimes for legal to review to then go to another and actually half the time it's not the client and the sale that's the issue. It's the challenge is trying to get your internal teams and trying to get prioritized and trying to work through your own processes internally to get the relevant product and set and delivery set up to go. Whereas as a startup, it's dynamic. So there isn't that decision tree that you've got to do internally. However, you're wearing multiple caps. So if, half the time when I've been in a startup, you're the salesperson, you're the marketing person, you're making the coffee, you're taking the bins out, you're doing everything to try and, as a team, with a small team, make things work. And I quite like that environment. I think, if you ask me today, that FinTech startup, RegTech, build it and move it on. And the idea was also, can I make the investment or get the time where I get a big win, out of it. Whereas I think it's a different mindset, the corporate style, the politics in the corporate style, and maintaining that, and then trying to go at a certain pace that suits certain people. Other people probably fit that. So I would say there's a mindset, but there's definitely a personality trait, I think, and you can change from one to the other. I've done it. I know, for example, Ben Rayner, who was on your podcast, has gone from, working with a large corporate bank to a very successful sort of FinTech in Silent 8 that's got up and running. So I think you can do it, but there is definitely a mind shift change of that. But also then, what do you enjoy doing? Because I think ultimately a lot of people fit in one or the other of camps.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, and I appreciate that. And I agree. Yeah, it's, I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we see with people transitioning from one to the other, right? It's just, you can commit to it and you can, say, I'm going to go after this and I'm going to get it done. But some people just don't like it. It's just one of them things. Right. And so it's, but it's interesting. And thinking about like starting out as an IC, and you referenced it already in this call, managing to like being an IC and the challenges, like from going from an individual contributor, into a sales leader now, like how did that happen? Was it something that you wanted to happen? Did it happen organically? Like what were the trigger points for that journey?
To the honest answer is, James, I've probably turned down many sales managers' jobs or sales directors' jobs along the way, because I've always enjoyed I wanted to sell and I wanted to go out and see people, and I didn't want to be sat behind a desk trying to work figures. It's not a core area of what I'm about. It's more about how can I go and help a client, help understand their problems, how do I solve their problems, and how can I win business. And to be honest, the winning business has almost become as a factor. If I can help and deliver and be seen as someone that is true to who I am, then that will always play well. The sales leader thing has come about in the end of multiple times being asked and then going, okay. And actually in my role today, I'm still trying to find that right blend. I'm being totally honest, because I look after and still do a lot of the big ticket work for my current role. Well, I've also got a small team delivering in different parts of the world and also account managing some of our biggest clients. Yeah. So trying to find that balance is something hard, but I don't want, I think it's trying to get that team, and I go back to sport a lot about how do I make them feel comfortable and doing well, but I also want them to be independent and deliver and work themselves. I'm not a micromanager, let's put it that way.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, I totally agree with you. I think the hardest job in sales is the job that you're doing, because in front of customers, responsible for big ticket selling, but also responsible for a team and everything else that entails, it is it's the hardest job in sales. It's certainly, in my opinion, the most rewarding, but it is nevertheless the most difficult, and it feels that way at times. And finding that blend, I don't think it's really, really difficult. That's why when you have it, it's so good. It's such it feels so good when it's there.
It does, and I think my current role is quite different because I'm services and technology, but and also advisory and covering AML, KYC, screening, fraud. And that is a challenge in itself, because I think we'll come on to this later, but I would almost class myself now as I've got knowledge of all of them because I've done multiple different jobs and multiple different areas. I've got a very good knowledge of every different sort of line of business within anti-financial crime. Trying to find salespeople that can go and have a C-level conversation for a KYC or flip to fraud, or then go into detailed discussion about transaction monitoring is a real challenge, for the business that we're in today. Whereas typically within a software cycle, but even then with Dun & Bradstreet or within, software sales, your software, is it a single product, or have you got multiple different applications that you can switch between screening and transaction monitoring, for example, or insights? And then being able to become a very specialist at understanding the issues and challenges that your clients are facing, it becomes critical.
Yeah. And actually, Mark, when I think about the sales leaders and the people in the space that I know, I would absolutely put you as one of the most knowledgeable on the technology, but also how it fits into the ecosystem. Like when I think of you, think about the conversations we've had over the years, there's a technical depth of understanding about not only the tech, but actually how it all fits in. And I agree with you, having that market knowledge, it comes down to the sales fundamentals, right? It's being really curious about the markets that you're in. You're like genuinely interested, not because you're interested because you know it's going to help you sell. That's obviously a key part of it, but actually being interested because you're genuinely interested, right? And that compounds over the years to when you become, you know, really knowledgeable about the market that you're working in, and that helps you so much. But I when I think of you, that's how I you know, I visualize you. And which leads me on to the next question about moving from being an IC into the sales leadership and all the sales leadership and all the challenges that brings with it. Like, what did you lean on to make that journey as easy as possible? Was it your sporting days? Was it previous managers? You know, I know that in your mind, you can think of the best manager that you worked with. You can also think of the one that you didn't enjoy working with so much, right? Everyone has those. And like, what have you used to ensure, you know, that you're the best manager that you can be? Like, what have you lent on in your experience to enable that?
I think I'm still on the journey, James. I think,
Same.
and there's one of the things I think you've got to continually learn from what you've done well, learn from what mistakes you've made, and I've definitely made a few of those. I think, you know, I did have there is a manager that I often go to. There's a couple that I've reached out to, but there's one that, you know, his background was from solution selling and actually used to teach the courses. If you go back to the old Miller Hyman, you know, and spin selling of the days, and I still, you know, there's a lot of those that then continue to evolve and adapt and change slightly, but have all got the same sort of foundings. So I often reach out to him to ask questions and get some insights of what's he done, what's his experience, how's he done that. I do think a straight sales director role is probably easier than current one where you've got your own delivery and targets and stuff, and then trying to manage a team. I mean, it's something that I'm continually trying to look at. What's the best method? How do I manage that? But then you also need your players on your team to be able to stand up and help you a little bit in that front and act almost as a group. And that's what I'm trying to create. I'm trying to create almost that I'm not the manager as such, and I've got a team. I'm trying to get a team that we can collaborate, we challenge each other, we ask questions, we work together, because it's a relatively small team at the moment, and that allows us to ask questions and deliver that way. You know, and there's some good experienced people within the team, within the group that I've got, where we play off each other. So I think there's definitely, what have I learned from the past? Also, have I got a couple of mentors that I can reach out to and talk to? There's then also, you know, the books and stuff that you read, you know, and, you know, I've been through multiple different solution selling techniques and books. You know, I'm still trying to find some of those around the management and how to best, you know, get the most out of your teams, and always open for advice. You know, that's one thing I think it's been one of my mantras, I think, is always be open to listening and learning and changing what you do, because someone always knows better than you, you know, in terms of, you know, their experience, and can you take some of that on board?
100%, Mark. I think committing to lifelong learning, you know, knowing that you can always learn something from someone, knowing that you can always improve. It was interesting, your approach to the team management. I read Phil Jackson's autobiography. He was the Chicago Bulls coach. I think it's called 11 Rings. I should know that. It's a really, really good. It was the autobiography was the Netflix series, The Last Dance. It was kind of, which is a 6-part documentary on Netflix. It's absolutely amazing sport documentary. Yeah. But the point is, Phil Jackson's approach to management is similar to that, in a sense of, it's when the team start to become part of the decision-making group, as a group, it's when they elevate themselves to another level. And it's not like the one person telling someone to do it because they're telling them to do it. It's when the team elevates itself to having a goal and a target and going and delivering. That's when you get the really, really top results. So it's an interesting, I and that's something that I, you know, the way that you're trying to approach it is the way that I try and approach it as well. Not always successful.
And it also might be easier when you've got a smaller sales team rather than I'm not dealing with 50, 100 salespeople, you know, on that. But sales, you just triggered me talking about the sales team and the team. But the word sales is also interesting, because if you go internally and you talk sales, and people, sales drive business, and without a business, the rest of the people, might not have the jobs that they've got today, because ultimately you've got to drive revenue. But even out in the market, if you label yourself as a salesperson, sales has got that word of, I don't want to be sold to like the olden days. And that's where I think subject matter knowledge and understanding becomes really important, because it's not about the old style, I've got a great product, buy it. That's not how the world is today. And also clients are much more knowledgeable today than they ever were. Yes. Right? Because data is there and it's an easy pull to. So understanding from a subject matter the challenges and the issues that someone may be having, how you've seen benchmarking from other players try and deal with that at the moment, and then what the real pain is, becomes really important for whether it's commercial director or commercial affairs or whatever. It really is. We're all salespeople, but it's not about the way of sales was and how it was perceived. I think it's got a bad reputation for what is a great industry, a really fulfilling career. There isn't the risk. I mean, my mum went, why are you not going to be a doctor, a teacher and stuff? The old school style. She was really nervous for me going into sales, because it was cutthroat, and you're only as good as your last sale. But if you do it in the right way and you have a real passion for it and understand it, and there's a lot of science behind sales, and I know that a number of people that I follow and work have gone into that real science, then I think there's a very fulfilling career in what is sales.
I couldn't agree with you more. I'm so glad you said that. I think that's absolutely correct. And, sales, exactly that. You nailed it. People don't want to be sold something, they want to buy, and that subject matter expertise, being able to speak to decision makers in a language they understand and really make them understand that what it's like in their shoes, is absolutely everything. And there is an art and a science to that I find fascinating. You know what I mean? That's why I've been in it for my whole career, right? And it's an incredibly fulfilling career, right? And I think, if you sell with integrity and you put your customers first and you're genuinely motivated to do the right thing by them, for me, it's the greatest game in the world, and that actually leads me on to the next question, which is about selling to banks. Selling to banks, to regulated customers, has always been probably the most difficult, right? Last year was the first year where AI became a real thing. Speaking about it for what seems like forever, but 2025, it felt tangible. And we're seeing more and more banks deciding to try to build it themselves, try to build capability in-house, right? A raft of newer entrants into the space across FinCrime, fraud, digital risk, using AI enabled, apparently. Not always, but apparently.
It gets you budget if you mention AI. So it
gets you budget if you mention AI, for sure, right? It gets you the eyeballs, definitely gets you the meetings. But selling into banks, I think, has never become more challenging. But actually, when you speak to the banks, there's never been more demand for actual solutions. So how do you see that right now? Like, what's it like selling to banks? Like, how do you, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's interesting, because predominantly at the moment, I've moved more into the services, where I've also done software, and I'm seeing it everywhere, right? So I've got the same challenges to a certain extent. I think you're absolutely right that there's never been a bigger challenge for any software sale as build versus buy.
Yeah.
Banks have understood that they've got their own problems and their own challenges, right? In terms of their legacy systems, their data sets, access to their data, right? And typically, knowing the software sale that you're going to come in with, what do you actually deliver? And is it just here's an out-of-the-box solution? But it's how does that integrate with the current complex legacy spaghetti that's currently within a large tier one bank? Because that is half the battle. It's not, have I got great technology? It's just, how does that implement? How does that integrate? How can that take the different data standards? How can that, map to the relevant data dictionaries that I've got for different sets of information? And then how does that API the relevant sets from my system to a different system and out there? And then how do I go through the governance? How do I go through the model risk? How do I do the change? And how do I manage change management within that? Is a real challenge and a real area. And I think you highlighted going into those tier one banks is a challenge, is a hard time at the moment when they've also gone out and hired lots of data scientists, lots of clever people looking at how can I take something that I know I've got a system. I don't want to try and bastardize a external vendor. That's going to cost me time, effort, stuff. Oh, I think I can build it myself. Now, I've seen many a time, and there's some really good learnings around, I've got a solution and I did it. I'm not going to name the bank, but this was a few years ago where I had a sort of list management solution. I went through the RFP. I got my sponsors. I got everyone covered. I won the RFP. We were about to go off, and someone who'd been on long-term sick came back from internal IT, said, I can build this myself. And they could say yes when everyone else said no, or they could say no when everyone else said yes. And they said and went and built it internally. Now, I know my solution was $4 million at ARR, and I think they spent over 12. But I can't influence that or manage that. And ultimately, I had the better solution in my mind, but I hadn't convinced everyone in the stakeholder management across the group of where it was at. And today, the challenge is there's a lot of pressure from the top about reducing cost, greater efficiency. I see it with myself, right? We've got 7,000 people currently doing investigations across transaction monitoring, KYC, AML. There's a lot of pressure on operations from the top. How do we reduce costs? Because compliance across as a group, as a part of the P&L, has increased and increased and increased. There's remediation, there's BAU. How do we make this more effective, more efficient? There's two ways. You either offshore, nearshore, or you look at technology and how can technology come along. But a number of the conversations even I'm having now is I've got tools that could help with automating the investigation and making it quicker. But to get that into a bank, even though they're already a client of mine and I'm delivering for them, is I tend to VPN through their systems. To try and get any external technology to help my analysts in their investigation process has to go through, liability, PII, go through hosting. How do I get that through? You're looking at an 18-month sales cycle minimum to be able to go through all the relevant steps. Could the bank do it quicker? And that's the question, which is why I think the build versus buy is, what can you do? How can you do it? How do you make it sustainable? And one of the questions, I had a good chat with a couple of the senior leaders in the UK recently, was the AI. They can test it, run POCs on their own data with some AMI and see some quick results. It's small use cases. And I think that's where AI has been given this banded. AI is an umbrella for multiple different areas. And one of my beliefs has always been, what's the right piece of technology for the right use case, even if it's in a multiple area? And I think what you're starting to see is even certain bots talking to other bots for, can I just have a rule? Because a rule still supplies and still works well in certain areas. Or is it unsupervised machine learning? I'm looking at pattern analysis. Or is it large language models and NLP to try and help write the narrative, etc. So trying to find, where do you fit today and what differentiates you from a technology play? And also, where do you not waste your time? And that's one of the biggest things I think I've learned over the years is qualify up front. Because that learning I got from losing that deal, right, was when I went to the next deal and I won a multi-million-dollar deal, was I asked, can internal deliver this first? Before I even got into an RFP, before I went down the line, I said, can you go and ask the internal IT, can they deliver this? No, they can't. Okay, great. Then I'm willing to engage and move on. But I qualified it straight up front because I didn't want to waste another 12, 18 months going on what I thought was a deal that I thought was going to land me into a great opportunity and bring me some nice revenue, and it didn't, and therefore qualifying early is critical. It's not bad. Here's my sales pipeline. And if it's not real, you're just wasting your own time and your own effort. So qualifying early and then focusing on where there's a real deal is something that I've always had that gut feeling. And I think you've got to trust that, but also asking the questions early on to say, here's where I focus. This is where this deal is real. This person's real. and then we'll work in the stakeholders, and I know we'll come on to that, but that's, something that I think is really valuable.
Again, it's such a great point. I say to the team, quantification is the most important thing in sales. But what you just said there is so important as well, Mark. You said there's a gut feel. And you and I know, being in the game for as long as we are, that there's a feeling that you have and you just know. And one of the focuses I have right now is trying to compress that time for the newbies. So they, starting out and not, being naive, because we all are when we start, to get into the point where they know, right? So it's a really interesting point. And I suppose leads me on to the next question about stakeholder management, especially in the context of 9, 12, 18, 24 month sales. Like outside of the process that you've got to go through, how do you manage yourself in those? Because that's a long time. And as you referenced a couple of times, it's high stakes as well. It's high stakes because these aren't, where there's not 20 deals to go in. So how do you manage yourself in that process to ensure success?
It's something that I've had to work on a lot over the years, because I was always, turn up, fly by night in the early days of just going not prepared, right? I think the bigger ticket and the longer the sales cycle, the better account planning, group planning, understanding who's in the deal, who's the influencer, who's your sponsor, who can give you an inside track, who's, how a procurement viewing what they're doing. Is it going to an RFP? Who are the main stakeholders? How do I then stay relevant over that? So I'm always looking for, what's the reason I can contact someone?
Yeah.
To be able to at least keep in touch, keep front of mind. Front of mind is critical, because it's easy, especially when you're the challenger, not the incumbent, to be then, you don't hear from people. And especially within the senior stakeholders, email's a tough one, because trying to email someone becomes really difficult. I don't want to give too many secrets away, because stuff, but relationship building becomes really, really, really important. The other thing with any software and big ticket software deal, you almost need a perfect storm, because what you need is a real need from the client to remedy something. There's an implication or impact that if they don't deliver that, what's the impact on them? Typically, from a regulatory point of view, there's likely to be a regulator on their case. They could be getting into that sort of challenge, or there's a certain cost reduction that they've got to make, and if they don't hit that target, they're in trouble. But you need a real reason for them to do something, right? Then you also need to be able to make sure that the stakeholder, the budget owner, the sponsor, all are there to the end of the sales cycle. Because many times you lose one of those and you almost have to restart again and go back to scratch, or something happens within the bank. So one of the banks I was due to sign a deal with, something happened, the main stakeholder disappears, someone new comes in, they never typically want to follow what's been done from the previous stakeholder, or you miss your budget cycle. So typically the banks work on a 12-month budget cycle. So for this year, nothing's going to be signed this year for a software deal. This year is about what goes into the budget for next year to then get delivered. Then you've still got to make sure that IT have got the right timing and the planning to be able to implement what they've got. And that is the challenge with the big software deals. And I think that's also where a lot of the banks are starting to go, I don't want a big monolith of one solution. Even if it was just for screening or just for transaction monitoring, it's now, what are the different use cases that I can look at certain typologies? So human trafficking, what can I do to try and manage that? And I'll build that on top of my existing, traditional infrastructure, or in investigations, how do I cut my investigation time from transaction monitoring from 45, 50 minutes for retail by half? If I can reduce that, that reduces the head count. That also then reduces my cost. And that's where there's multiple POCs going at the moment with AI. Not that many, I think, are trying to quite get there yet, because again, if technology can't be used first, there has to be what's the end goal, what's the reason, and why am I trying to do something, and then can I fit the right application to the right use case? Where if I just go, I want to use large language models because OpenAI and Anthropic and all the other stuff become really cool, and technology guys typically go, right, let's just try and play in a sandbox. what are you trying to achieve from a business perspective? Is it, am I creating value? Am I reducing cost? Am I increasing revenue? Ultimately, they're the three things that, that come in here. And then what am I doing for it? And that's where I think stakeholder management becomes absolutely critical. Whether it's just can I see you for a coffee? Can I meet in person? Here's the latest newsletter, or by the way, seeing this in the market, this might impact what we're looking at. How does that come to you? Always be looking for a way to be able to keep in touch, keep relevant, but not from a sales position. It's more from a thought leadership, from a standpoint of where you're at, what that might impact you, or we're getting close to budget cycle. How do we fit this in to help you so that you've got the relevant time to go through your signature process? And you've got to also realize that everyone inside the bank has their own what's in it for me. And that was one of the things I got from one of the, it was a Dutch solution selling 10, 15 years ago, but that intrinsic, extrinsic, everyone has their own agenda. And typically within a bank on a big typical deal, your CFO, your finance person, compared to your procurement person, compared to your sponsor, compared to the analyst doing the work, all have different reasons for why they may want to purchase your product.
Yeah.
And you've got to be able to understand what's in it for them, both from a personal and from a business perspective. What's in it for the business in terms of the value proposition. There's a lot of thought that needs to go in, and then you need some luck. And I've been lucky and I've been unlucky. But you spend, and the one thing with the big banks, if you go whale hunting takes a long time. You've got to have a good shot, and you've got to hope that every now and again you'll hit a whale.
Yeah.
But you also, from a sales and a sales leader pieces, that's risk and reward. It's a big risk to get the big reward. From a business perspective and growth, you need some deer and you need some rabbits, because typically, and especially for startups, they start from the rabbit. You need to be also talking to some deer and to understand where you are in that pipeline. But trying to mix your pipeline up is something that I think even today, I look at some advisory work's relatively small to a multi-million services deal, for a large volume of people. But you still need a mix of those deals to keep the pipeline coming in. And that's something that, as I say, I've done it a couple of times. I've gone big and boom and bust, I went, but I've also had some really good wins. But you've got to manage that from all different aspects. And I think anyone trying to go up the scale into the big ticket sales is also realize it's a long time and there's a lot of risk and it's tough times. You're going to have tough times as well, waiting, not knowing, trying to find out.
That's great advice. And it's great advice, Mark. And I think, I see that all the time, that it's a conversation we have often. And it's interesting, right? And you've referenced it in this call, like sales methodology, champions, decision makers. And one of the things we're seeing is that sales leaders are sometimes in this space, and others across technology, it's not just within fraud, fin crime, digital risk, are putting more of an emphasis on methodology over domain expertise. So they might hire a medic sales pro who's been selling in pharma over someone who hasn't been trained in that methodology but has been selling fin crime solutions successfully for 5 years. They might go and take the medic pro because of, they're going to transition in. And going back to your point about being front of mind, you can only really be front of mind when you can go to the decision makers, the personas, the champions with stuff of interest, right? And to do that effectively, you've kind of got to be in the space. Like, do you see that? Like the methodologies seem to be more prominent now, but I don't know the impact.
Yeah, I think that methodology is critical. It is. But whether it's medic today, it was spin back when I started, and I've seen multiple pieces. I've taken, I think, of multiple different ones I've been on. My mentor still went, what's the situation? What's the implication? What's the problem? What's the need? And I don't think it's gone that far away from that. Then it's around your stakeholder management. Also, what's the persona of who you're dealing with? Are they reticent to try and, are they a risk taker? Are they gung ho, or do they need convincing, everyone's got different personas. Also, I might not be. So half the time I look at who am I dealing with in the stakeholder management, and who for my team, not just my immediate commercial team, but also who within my team is the right person to talk to. Because if I'm going to go and talk to an IT person, I'm not the right fit necessarily as to personas of how we fit together. Whereas if I get someone from my solutions team or IT team that can converse in the right language and understand what they're trying to get from the sale, becomes really, really critical. So I think, subject matter expertise to me today is critical.
Yeah.
And us as salespeople, that you can't. I've never wanted to rely, and this is maybe because I've had to work in fintechs and startups rather than for a big corporate, because a big corporate's typically got a subject matter expert on hand that will come and support you in a meeting.
Yep.
I never wanted to rely on them. I wanted to understand, and it's taken me a long time to understand banking. I think for a number of years, I really struggled to get my head around how can you have so many different people doing so many different roles that almost have the same job title, or isn't the same job title, and how do they link together? And how does that work from it? How does the first line work with second line, and where does it sit, and how do they keep crossing over? And if you don't understand that, how can you go to a COO or a chief risk officer or a head of KYC or head of transaction monitoring and be able to have an articulated conversation about what's their real problem? What's the impact or the pain they're facing? If they don't fix that, is their job on the line? Or what's going to happen? Or what's the outcome that's going to be? If they do nothing, what happens with them? If you don't understand their process and how they work, and for me, Ben worked in a bank, others have worked in a bank. I've not worked within a bank, but I've worked with many banks and worked for very different size organizations. But I always try to put my foot in the client's shoes, and not just my main stakeholder, but everyone, as what are they looking to achieve? What helps them? How does this help? Because if you can put yourself there, and then I'm always trying to get the best outcome, the revenue will come from yourself. It's not about price. Price is never in the thing. What value am I providing from identifying your real pain? Because half the time you get told a story by someone that isn't the real pain.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, so what? So if what's that problem? What's the implication of that further down the line? How does that, if that happens, this happens. And then you get into a proper discussion, you can really get to what's the real root cause of the pain? How do I solve for that? And then how do I build that up? And if you haven't got that knowledge, it doesn't matter if you've come from pharma, you're going to look out of your depth, being able to have a conversation at a C-suite, especially a C-suite level, but even at a director level, with someone that's going, and the terminology becomes critical. We have a lot of acronyms within financial crime. Right?
100%. Yeah.
If you don't know the acronyms and don't know the insights, and half the time also, can I just confirm, is that what you mean? because yeah, exactly. I'll tell you, for example, my current business, my advisory in the US is called Financial Crimes Advisory. Said it doesn't fly in the UK because that's the regulator. So getting the right acronym becomes really, really important, right?
Yeah.
But that's why I think you need both. There has to be a structure and there has to be a knowledge, and that's where the science of sales comes into it. But it hasn't, although there's lots of new terminology in sales, it hasn't really changed in that ultimately, what is the pain that they're suffering? How do I understand their pain? Where does my solution fit within that to help articulate it, and what value can I bring to them and help them both themselves and the business meet the objectives that they need? But if you need to understand, and this is where we've seen, I think, in a lot of technology companies now, often the salesperson isn't what you class as a medic type farmer. It's often the guy that was the subject matter expert has been made the commercial person because they've got the domain knowledge. And that's what you need. You need both.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, you see that. So Mark, we've known each other for years, and whenever I think about calling you, it's typical that you're in another country or about to travel to another country. You are, a fully committed professional. You've taken risks across your long and successful career. You've worked for startups. You've been first person on the ground. You've worked for bigger businesses, and there's challenges with that as well. And you've done that all whilst being, a father. People on the payroll. Big responsibilities, right? That we all have. and you've also gone whale hunting, taken risks on a day-to-day basis or on any basis, short, medium, long term. Like, what is the mindset for you to be successful? How do you cope with that all? Like, I know you've been running, various challenges over the years and all the rest of it. I know you're an active guy. Like, what are the things that you do to keep yourself on top?
I think there's two things. You talk about mindset and stuff. I think you've got to be resilient. In this job, it's never smooth. You're either really riding the crest of a whale, or you're trying to get back to the crest of a riding the crest of a wave, or trying to get back to the crest of a wave, right? So there's never a straight, easy life, especially on the hunting side rather than the account management side, and that's the area I've mainly focused on. So, you've got to be tenacious. You've got to have a passion for it. And I think it's something I tell my kids at the moment. I know my kids are 18. I've got twins who are 18 and my son's 20, and they're all just trying to work out. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do. Do I want to go to uni? Do I not want to go? And I said, I don't mind whatever you want to do, but now is the time to try out and find what you're passionate about in life, because you don't want to be in a job that you don't love.
No.
And I think that's something that I've really found that all the way through this, if you've got a passion for it, and again, if you're selling something, I always want to believe in what I'm saying. There's nothing that's perfect, right? You're never going to have something that's off the 100% there. The technology might be 70%. You're still always trying to build the next bit, or you've got stuff that works really well, but there's always stuff. It's never going to be perfect, but you've got to believe in what you're doing. Believe in yourself. Believe in the tools and the solution that you're selling. I think it becomes critical. But then you've got to be tenacious. You've got to be able to have a thick skin. Sales, you've got to have a thick skin. You can't worry about someone saying no. I want to understand why they've said no. Is it a timing thing? Is it a change in process? Is it something that is out of their hands? Why? And then you've got to be working to work around it. So I think the mindset of something there. I don't, my brain constantly is never. I mean, I've been accused by my wife at times of, you need to switch out and get back into life, because sometimes there's so much going on.
For sure.
But I think you need time away. You need time to plan time to say, I need downtime. Even if it's going for a walk. I live near the coast down on the south. I find it very therapeutic to go down near the sea. And I go Absolutely. Down there, even just, even if I go for a 20-minute jog, I find that really helps just get yourself back, reset. And I think that's the other thing, reset. You've got to be able to look at what's important today, because there's stuff always on top that needs to be done, and where it is. How do you prioritize your day? What are you going to achieve today? What is your objective today? Every meeting you're going to, what's the objective? Planning. And it's something I wasn't always very good at, but still, could be better. CRM is a necessary thing that we're not very good at, because I'd rather be out selling than doing the admin. But on the other hand, if you capture the data and understand what's going on and where it's at, it helps if you're ill or someone else, they've got the inside on it. Cool. So, it's a love-hate relationship for me with CRM, but it's a necessary. And I think, but putting controls in place and also making sure that the work-life balance is there. If you just work all the time, you're going to burn out, you're going to wear out. And I see there's all these apps now that are coming out about how to manage your lifestyle or whatever. To me, it's always been family first,
always.
Bit of everything. Then I work hard, and I work hard. I'm a professional, but also I need to look after yourself. And especially as you can see, no hair, and I'm getting old. It's now also, I look a lot into what's the nutrition,
Definitely.
What's the food, what's the activities I can try and do to look after myself. Do I feel brilliant at the moment? No, I've been traveling for 2.5 weeks, but I still go to the gym most of the time when I'm doing that, to try and at least break up that and the flights and stuff. But it's important that you look after yourself, because otherwise you're not going to do your family or the work any good.
I totally agree with everything you said there. And I think it's interesting, the last 10, 15 years, whatever, like nutrition, and it's all, lifestyle has become so prominent. But the older I get, is so like, it's you are what you eat, you know, it's just so true. And there's a direct correlation between how, you know, how well I keep myself to how well I can perform at work. And like you, I've got 3 kids, and you know, I get it, but I think it's really important advice that you said there. Sometimes just being able to take a step back and break away from it, because there's been a few times my wife is saying to me like, "Are you here, James?" You know what I mean? Like, can you come back into the present, because you've got a deal going on and there's stuff happening, and it's a lot, and being able to break that is super important.
I think it's really important, because ultimately they're the ones that really count, and that's really important. But to break away and just give yourself a few minutes of downtime, whether that's doing whatever it is, you know, whether it's just listening to music, whether it's going for a walk, whether, you know, there's everyone's got their different thing, but you almost need that passion outside of work and activities and stuff to give yourself time to just break and look after yourself. Because I see it a lot. People get very tired, very worn out, especially, you know, by the end of the year. Last year, I was traveling. I was sat in Dublin. You know, I must admit, I was in a pub having a pint, and I was thinking, I can't have another drink, and I'm so tired. But so was the guy I was talking to, who was working for one of the big cryptos. Was Mark. I just want to crawl home. I'm so tired. And crypto never sleeps, mate. It's 24/7. You know, so he was worn out, more worn out than I was. You know, but it's one of those where, you know, you've got to look after yourself and try to get that break, you know. And one of the things I've really also tried to do is when I go on holiday now with the family, is I really want to go on holiday with the family and not be constantly on calls. Or I'll set a time of the day, whereas if I need to touch in with work, I'll touch in. This is my one bit of time. Outside of that, I'm not, because otherwise there's no point in going on holiday. You don't have a break, you don't help the family, and also you don't help yourself going back to work because you're not refreshed and have had that break.
Absolutely right. For sure. Yeah, agreeing all of that. Thinking about your career so far, I mean, you mentioned it before, like, but thinking about the most, you know, the best moment or one of the highlights, that must stand out as like one of the all-time highlights, right? And, you know, are there others as well? Like, is that the one?
Yeah, I think that's definitely one that was, because it was taking what we had and then working with the client to understand what their real problem was, and bringing some of the bits and pieces at a time to really help them map out a solution for the client that was a real changer. And that was, you know, something that I really enjoyed. I think one of the other ones was when I'd lost the deal, learned about it, and went back and then really qualified to win a multi-million-pound deal a couple of years ago. Was really, really, really valuable, you know. And then I think my biggest order value was about 16 million, right? And that was to land that and get that in, you know, that was good.
Sizable.
Although I've seen some of the stuff that the guys in the US have done, you know, but that's US rates.
That's the US. Doesn't count. It doesn't count.
Can't count.
Yeah,
you know,
big difference. The dollar conversion, it doesn't count, Mark. But
no.
But yeah, but I think those times where you don't get the result, but you go back and improve and get it, they're always pretty sweet. And then on the flip side of that, you know, mistakes and learning. I'm not talking about like, you know, dropping the ball. We all make mistakes every day, but like, maybe a better way to put it is there something that you would tell your younger self, cut that out or be better here? Or is there anything that like you did when you were coming through that could be improved upon, you know, that you would do different in hindsight?
I think the early me, the qualifying, you know, I mean, we touched on it a bit. There's qualifying, a bit of structure as to, you know, don't just turn up to a meeting without what's your objective, what your outcome, what you want to get from it. And don't expect to get the sale in the meeting, but also where are you in the sales process? What do you want from that process, and what do you want to do it? Because sometimes you've gone to meetings, gone along, then gone, oh, I wish I'd asked that or that. So I think a bit better planning in the early days. And I'm sure some of my managers would have said, like, I got the deal done in the end, but could I have got it done quite quicker? Sure, maybe. Is something that qualifying and getting that bit of planning earlier on, I think, is something that you should be doing. And then just trying to work out who's the relevant target. You know, and I think I picked that up fairly quickly, but I think that was one of the things that to me stands out. And even now, you know, I got given my first one source job, I got given a terrible terrible territory. And I think that's the other thing. As a salesperson starting out, you're not likely to get the best territory and the best opportunities. You've got to earn your shift. And I think, sometimes you can't expect to just jump straight up. You've got to earn your stripes, do your work, pick that territory, try and get a couple of good wins there. That builds confidence, builds trust in you, and then you over time you'll be able to get the better opportunities.
I think that's a really, really important point. I think when I first started in sales, I don't even know if it was naive. I certainly was naive, but on that particular point, you're not going to walk into a sales organization and be given the biggest accounts or the best territory. That's ridiculous. Like you're a newbie, and so therefore it's unlikely that you'd actually be able to handle the biggest accounts or the best territory. So, but it's exactly that. It's understanding that you're not going to be given these. You've got to graft. You've got to you've got to show up every day. You've got to be a professional, like you said, like you referenced, like you are, Mark. You've got to be a pro. It's got to be your passion. It's got to be outside of your family and friends and everything else, and maybe like religion or something. It's got to be the priority. Your work has really got to take priority. And so, but yeah, but that bit about, especially for people joining the sales ranks, just understanding the ecosystem that they're entering and understanding how it all plays out would enable them to get there quicker. I think if they look at it that way.
I think so. I think that one other thing, and it just jumped into my mind, is you can't take a time off in sales, because if you don't put the time effort in now, 6 months down the line, you're not going to have enough pipeline.
100%.
Right. And you've always got to be filling up the pipeline consistently, even if you've got a big deal about to come in and another deal and you're going to smash your year. It's unforgiving, because bosses always want the next and what you're doing next and what you're next, and you move on from it. And I think you've got to take a little bit time to enjoy the wins, but also be conscious that you've got to always be filling the pipe and filling the funnel of the next opportunity and the next opportunity and what's coming next for you. And if you do take that time off, it might not hit you immediately, but it will come back to bite you further down the line.
For sure. Absolutely right. Yeah. Consistent business development, pipeline is life, right? So as a great sales trainer once said, listen, that's great advice. I think exactly that. I think the application in your in the early days is so important. Final question for me, Mark. This has been a fantastic conversation, and we kind of touched on it a second ago, but in terms of like your advice to salespeople, new salespeople, people joining the ranks, like what is like the top three things? What are the things that if you could speak to you when you were joining, that you would say do these things, and you'll be successful in the quickest time possible?
Have a passion for it.
Yeah.
I think understand and learn your expertise, your subject matter.
Yep.
And then understand the process. So whatever sales, whether it's medic, whether it's spin, whatever it is, understand what solution selling should be and why. And that's the key point there is why.
Yeah.
There's a methodology. Okay, but why? Why does that work? What does that do? And how does that help me put myself in the best position to understand the client's challenges, needs, pain, and how my solution might add the value to them to get the deal done. And I think if you always put yourself in the client's shoes and understand the client's needs and requirements, you won't go too wrong. Don't focus on you, focus on them. And the last thing I say is everyone used to say you've got two ears and one mouth. So the other thing is at the start of any sales thing, and I think that's a good bit of advice going back, you just triggered me, is listen to the client, let the client talk. So the first meeting shouldn't be you spouting about who you are, what you are, how great your company is, all the stat. Understand who are they, what are their requirements, what are their issues, what are their challenges. Delve, ask questions, qualify, and then understand. And don't be afraid that if it isn't the right opportunity to say no. And I've done that a couple of times in my career where I've gone, sorry, this isn't right for me. I recommend someone else, but this isn't what we do. And that's actually played well back months later, where they've then come back to me because I said no, rather than try to say yes consistently for something that I couldn't deliver and wasn't going to be able to do.
That integrity piece, I value that so much, and yeah, I've had something similar in the past when you're actually advising the customer, like you said, putting yourself in their shoes, actually what's best for them, and advising what's best to them might not be best for you on a commercial basis at that time, but long term, it absolutely will be. It takes 10 years to build a reputation, 10 seconds to destroy it, and all that jazz, which is, it's true. They're cliches for a reason, because it's absolutely correct. And that's fantastic advice. And just one final thing before we finish up, I just wanted to ask that on the process bit, on the solution selling bit, I say to the team, I think it's 90%. I think sales is 90% process, science, and 10% art. And the art is when you're with people and you're genuinely interested to learn about them and putting yourself in their shoes. And that would you agree with that? And, or would you chop it up differently?
It's a good question. I think there is a lot of science. There's definitely absolutely a lot of science and the right process in it, right? And understanding are you at the same place in the process as the client is critical, right?
Yeah.
Because half the time you want to be here and they're here. Understanding where you are in the process is critical. But I still go back to the day people buy people and people buy relationships, right? So yes, there is, but the art of if I'm not a nice person and I don't get on and I don't come across and as I am engaged, passionate, want to understand them, then if you've got two products that are very similar, ultimately they're going to buy from the person that they like and get on well with and have a good relationship with. So I think whether it's 70-30 or whatever, but I think that relationship piece of, do I like who I'm doing business with? Do I want to, whether you go out for dinner or whether you go sit in a meeting and having a coffee, do I like the person? Do I have the same values as that person? Could I work with that person in the future? Is something that I think is critical within the sales process, as well as doing the right process and planning.
Yeah. Yep. It's great advice again. And Mark, this has been a fantastic conversation. I massively appreciate it. It was great to, as I said, I didn't know you were a hockey player back in the day, right? So it was great to learn about that. But it was just fantastic for you to share, all of it really, and it will help young people. It was, and it will help people, at leadership level as well to navigate it. It's important for, to hear from other leaders about how they're seeing things as well. So, full of insights, hugely appreciate the conversation, massively appreciate you taking the time out of your day again. And, just thank you. Thank you so much for this.
No, it's a pleasure. Enjoyed it.
Fantastic. We'll catch you later.
Thanks very much. Cheers.
All the best. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.